Kshatriyas. To Kautilya, Kshatriyas were protectors of land, quote unquote. He shows a marked preference for the nobility, the protection of Kshatriya blood, and the preservation of the royal line. The preference for noble birth is explained as, quote unquote, people will naturally obey a high-born king, though he be weak. A man of nobility has a natural capacity to rule, because the people will respect that person more. Preservation of the royal line through sons is shown by the advice that an only son, even if he revolted against his father, should not be put to death but only be exiled. If an only son was evil, attempts should be made to get him to father a son, get him to give birth to a son. Or if a daughter was designated to bear a son to carry on the royal line. Okay, if an only son was evil, attempts should be made to get him to father a son, which means to give birth to a son. Or else, a daughter was designated to bear a son to carry on the royal line. A king who could not father any son might even get one born to his wife using a kinsman or a princely neighbor. In the detailed discussion on whom to give as a hostage, the advice is that a king might give himself up if there was only one son capable of carrying on the duties because, quote unquote, all expectations are concentrated on an only son. It was better to give a daughter as a hostage rather than a son because, quote unquote, the daughter is not an heir, is useful only to others, and costs more to the receiver. Kautilya also expresses a preference for a legitimate son, costs more to the receiver. Do you understand that the receiver is not going to immediately, just because she is a hostage, she is not going to do heinous crimes to her. She is going to treat her as a political prisoner and give her her due respect and due dignity. Because when the conflict is solved, she will get back to her father, which is why it costs more to the receiver, because they were not giving her up to a barbarian, they were giving her up to a neighboring king. Kautilya also expresses a preference for a legitimate son. Expresses a preference for a legitimate son over an illegitimate one, even if the illegitimate son was wiser than the legitimate one. The reason given is because the legitimate son is better able to command the loyalty of the people. So he was just being pragmatic. Kakade. The people will like the king's son. In Kautilya's view, an army composed of Kshatriyas was the best one, unless the Vaishya or Sudra forces were much more numerous.